Another session of Cannon's class, a very special Cannon's class with, Dr. Carr, who's been, people in the comments, they loving everything that you have to say. They want to make sure they can always get in contact with you, obviously.
I'm honored to be here with you.
Oh, it's an honor.
Anytime.
And we want to just give this one just some quick attention based off of this holiday that is among us called Thanksgiving.
Yes.
Now, Thanksgiving, as we know, is a holiday once you're in school that we teach to our kids that, the pilgrims and the Indians come together and they share a feast.
Friendship.
And it's all about family and sharing.
Yes.
When ultimately, from my studies, and I'm pretty sure you can kind of expound on this even more, is that really that feast was ultimately a celebration for a massacre of over 700 Native Americans. And then once Abraham Lincoln, actually years later, then sanctioned it a holiday kind of tried to clean it up a little bit. But the actual, feast that the pilgrims were having during that time wasn't a celebration of friendliness or giving at all. It was really like, hey, they finally got some food because they had been starving.
That's right.
And they killed the godless Indians, which they called it. So I would love to just, kind of pick your brain on that and just say, why is it that we celebrate Thanksgiving and why haven't we heard the truth about Thanksgiving?
Well, I think you just laid it out. If you tell the truth, then you got to talk about an act of genocide, brother.
Right.
Yeah, that first Plymouth colony in the early 17th century. We know that they landed here in 1620.
Right.
Or as Malcolm said, Plymouth Rock landed on us.
Yeah,
right?
We didn't land on Plymouth Rock.
That's right. Plymouth Rock landed on us, brother.
Yeah.
And our Native American, the Wampanoag people in that region,
right,
Massachusetts, and they only came here, these white folks, with about 100 so-called colonists.
Wow.
By the time they got through that first winter, they were celebrating the fact that they had survived, but only about half of them survived.
Wow.
Yeah, and we only a little over 50.
Wow.
So they had a little harvest, but before they had that harvest, they were dying from disease and starvation.
Right.
There are only 2 accounts that survived that give any testimony as to who was there at that first Thanksgiving, and both of them written from the white side.
Right.
We know now, looking at some of the records of trials, for example, that some of those folks weren't just eating vegetables and meat.
Right.
Well, they were eating meat, but some of the meat included
human meat.
Human meat, brother. Because when you starving and somebody died, you looking at them like, well, you're not using your body anymore, so maybe I just need to eat you.
So at the first Thanksgiving, they wasn't no turkey.
Well, they were giving thanks that they didn't have to eat each other anymore.
Right.
Although in their defense, in a little bit, some of them were tried for that because cannibalism was still something that they didn't want to do.
Wow.
But at some point, you have to survive.
Right.
But the Native Americans, on the other hand, who apparently attended the first Thanksgiving, the Native Americans who may have been as much as 90 folks who were there.
Right.
And there's no clear account as to why they were there.
Right.
They had plenty of food.
Right.
Cranberries, fish. They had done
from
all
the
that.
Land.
From the land.
It was their land.
It was their land. In fact, they did help. Some of those Europeans survived.
Right.
Now, looking back 500 some years later, that may have been a bad decision.
Right.
But they did help them, and they were celebrating. It wasn't friendship. Now, there were some Africans. There were some Native Americans.
Right.
There was one dude named Squanto, for example.
Right.
Who ended up being enslaved.
Wow.
That's how he learned English.
Wow.
So he became a translator.
Wow.
Because he had been pressed into service by these Europeans, who, as you said, looked at these Native Americans as they were godless.
Right.
So they gave thanks to their God for having taken land from people who didn't even see land that way.
Right.
Because they were like,
what, they didn't even see it as theirs. This is like land is land.
Exactly.
They truly believe this land is our land. This land is your land.
Your land, nature.
Right.
In fact, they didn't even farm the
Right.
way we think about farming.
Right.
When you look at the European style, they clear out the land, then they make rows of things.
Right.
The Native Americans, like, what are they doing?
Right.
You grow food in conversation with other food. Wow. So the squash, the pumpkins, the greens.
All grew together.
It all grew together, and that way you get to replenish the land. Because what's taken from one gives to the other, and you don't have to keep clearing out land to plant new crops. You don't plant
powerful.
single crops.
Right.
So even the technology of Thanksgiving gives us this notion that somehow the Europeans were superior.
Right.
Their God was better, their science was better. But no, they had starved. They had disease, and about half of them had died.
Right.
And they celebrated making it through their first winter, and the Native Americans showed up to be like, well, I guess y'all made it. Meanwhile, they plotting on the Native Americans.
Man, and that's again, like even going back to what we discussed about Columbus Day, and you know that it should be shifted to Indigenous Peoples Day. But even again, this shows the kind hand and the generosity of the natives to it, even though it was a massacre that that was all that was being set up, and therefore they were all thinking of the Europeans were thinking to rob them the entire time.
That's right.
But these kind people were still willing to give their land, give their food, and share with them. And we almost, when we celebrate Thanksgiving, we almost, again, we see it from the European perspective as I'm giving you something and you're giving me something, when ultimately the natives were saving the Europeans. And even that idea, like that should be something that we should embrace and celebrate. And even as, you know, we all gonna sit down and have smoked turkey and chitlins and ham and all of that stuff.
Question.
And we've turned it more into a cultural day about family.
Yes.
Which I can embrace. I mean, anytime
me
we
too.
can get
All of
down
us.
and build with our generations and our family is important. But I think, again, that truth needs to come to the forefront of why these holidays were created and even the purpose. And like I said, even so much so that I felt like Lincoln used it as propaganda.
Oh, you know he did.
To, again, bring people closer together. But at the idea to say, look at what the elite have set up.
That's exactly right.
Right.
Well, 1863, when we see it become part of the formal American calendar, you know, the Civil War is still going on.
Right.
Part of it is trying to create a national identity.
Right.
How do you build? And that's what holidays
that
really
everyone
are.
can embrace.
That's exactly
that
right.
Patriotism.
That's exactly right. Holidays are about building a national identity, a patriotism, a love of country.
A myth that everyone can follow.
Straight myth, brother. I mean, this is a guy who signs an Emancipation Proclamation, and in the same breath, then signs the death warrant on 38 Lakota Sioux in Minnesota, the biggest killing of people by approved by a president, a guy named Little Crow, who was leading a revolt against the United States Army up in Minnesota, Fort Snelling. Same place they had Dred Scott and Harriet Scott enslaved. Yeah,
and
man.
Lincoln signed that.
Lincoln signed the death warrant the same time he signed the Emancipation Proclamation.
Wow.
I mean, this is about taking that land from them Native Americans. So we look, Abraham Lincoln signed Thanksgiving into law. Yeah, he was giving thanks for taking land from Native Americans that he was responsible for dispossessing them of the land.
Wow.
And then, of course, it takes, when do we see it become on our calendar in November?
Right.
1941.
Oh, wow.
What's going on in 1941? World War II.
Yeah.
You need that national identity, that patriotism. Here's the thing that a lot of people don't know about Thanksgiving. Now, you know, you in and out of New York all the time. I was loving the man on the street. When you're talking about, you be able to vote like you get a lottery ticket.
Right there.
That was genius, brother.
Thank you.
Genius. But, you know, New York City, immigrants are coming. These white immigrants. They don't know they're white till they get to the United States.
Right.
Like we were talking about. They trying to avoid last place. So I'm from Hungary, or I'm from Germany, or I'm coming. So they come, they're getting jobs wherever they can.
Right.
A lot of these immigrants worked in the garment district in New York.
Right.
A lot of
Schmata business.
Exactly. A lot of them end up working for R.H. Macy.
Ah.
R.H. Macy is, you know, of course,
Macy's.
the department store guy, right? Now, they don't celebrate Thanksgiving. They don't know nothing about that.
Right.
So when it comes time for that time, where are they going to go? So they get in this national spirit. What do? They start wearing their national dress. They bring their national dishes. They bring them to the store. They bring them around, and they exchange with each other because they're going to get in the mirror. Macy's people are watching this, and they say, this is very interesting. So then
we could capitalize off of
this. And so what do? They start doing a little march around the block to show off their clothes.
Right.
And then people start watching. Macy's like, this is interesting. Years later, we now have the
Macy's Day Parade.
And in that Macy's Parade, I'm sure you've been. I don't know if you've taken your kids yet.
Yeah, I've hosted it before.
Oh, that's right. But look, here's the thing. This is why I go to the Macy's Parade. I try to go if I'm on the East Coast because I like to be there and I like to watch it on TV while I'm watching it in real life.
Right.
What you see is all these people that bake these cookies and all these sales to get their band to the Macy's Parade. Right. They don't get on TV, not all of them. Why? They walk by, but I guess what gets on TV? Every float. Why? Because I'm watching the children point to the floats and say, that's so-and-so, that's so-and-so. Every one of them floats is something to buy.
Yeah.
I'm watching the parents looking too, and they know some of the people, but then some of them they don't.
Right.
Who's the last act in the Macy's Parade? Santa Claus.
Always.
And what is Santa Claus? He's waving by. No, not BYE. B-U-Y. Bye. Why? Because what you just saw
Was
is
a
one
commercial.
long commercial. And it started with R.H. Macy looking at these immigrants who knew nothing about Thanksgiving,
Wow.
who came to try to be part of the American ritual. And he's sitting there thinking, how can I make a profit off of this little celebration? It's really fascinating.
Fascinating.
Yeah.
The way-
1941, they make it official.
Wow.
Yeah.
And there we have it. We celebrate. So keep all that in mind when you eating your fried turkey and your chitlins and your canned cranberries.
Yeah. And then going back and giving all your money back to the store on Black Thursday and Cyber Monday and all that.
The next day you're going to be shopping. They in your pocket.
That night, midnight.
Yeah, it's going down. Well, Doc, I appreciate this again, dropping that wisdom about Thanksgiving. I know this is going to touch a lot.
Brother, Cannon's class is no joke, brother. I'm loving watching you do this thing.
Oh, I'm loving you being a part of it. I thank you for being a mentor. I thank you for being someone who guides me through this process and continues to educate all of us.
Learning with you, brother. We side by side on this.
There it is.
I appreciate you.
Appreciate you.
Yes, sir.